Welcome to the Bodybuilding Banter Podcast, your number one source of all things bodybuilding. Be sure to like and subscribe to stay up to date on future episodes. Now, here's your host, Leroy Rollins.
All right, people, welcome to another episode of the podcast. I'm here with two very special guests. I'm sure most of you know who these guys are, but Berto, why don't you start everybody off in case they may not know this face?
Okay, well, I doubt it, man, because your podcast is one of those where, like, talk about pure natural bodybuilding, right? Like, whoever listens to this, like, you probably have a lifer.
Yeah, they're committed.
You know, like, yeah, so I'm a lifer at this point, man. First competition was in 2007, but I've been training since 1999. Fuck, man, time flies. So, yeah, first comp 2007, last season 2017, had quite a few in between. And yeah, natural bodybuilding is my thing, to the point now where it's, I guess, what I do for a living, and which is crazy because when I first started, it was like they were like, "Don't do bodybuilding; you're just gonna end up doing pay for pay," and that's all they have to offer. So, yeah, it's like a dream come true to be quite honest, man. So
cool. And Brandon, my man, introduce yourself to the people. I assume they probably know who you are as well, but in case they don't.
Yeah, absolutely. Brandon Wadas. I have been competing just a little shorter than Alberto. My first competition was in 2011. I turned pro in 2015 and have had a couple of pro seasons. Next year, I'll be competing again, and hopefully I can twist Alberto's arm, and I'll see him on stage.
I like it. So for those that are obviously watching the podcast, you saw by the title, probably some clickbaity thing about natural bodybuilding and becoming a pro. But Brandon posted an interesting post that I thought was something worth talking about regarding, if turning pro is maybe not as cool anymore, maybe it's losing some value, maybe it's too easy. So I figure if the three of us would have a conversation about that and maybe branch off and explain maybe why you think that way and some rationale behind it, maybe some ways we would think about changing that. So why don't you start off, Brandon, with what sparked that and your mindset towards the subject?
Sure, absolutely. Not that this is the first time that I've seen this, but over the weekend I was watching a show online. Many shows are online now that you can view. So just because I'm a fan of natural bodybuilding, kind of leads me to these shows. I'm like, hey, I want to see what the people look like, see how the competition looks, see what the pros look like. Yep. I was initially watching it for the pro bodybuilding class, but for whatever reason, the show that I was watching, the pro class was last, so I had to sit through the amateurs. As I was sitting through the amateurs, they would give the awards out directly after the class, so it was moving pretty smoothly. But one thing that really bothered me was that they were giving out pro cards to classes of 2. So literally the person would face one other competitor and they would win a pro card. And then, here's the kicker too, as the guy who won his pro card in bodybuilding then competed in the pro class later on. And I was just like, you got to be kidding me. He literally just beat one dude, and then he goes and competes in the pro lineup. And, of course, he didn't place well. Yep. But I was just like, wow, what kind of organization, literally you could turn pro from facing one competitor and then just go right into the same show and compete in the pro ranks. And for me as a pro, and not that I'm some lofty pro, but it was almost embarrassing to me, and I wasn't even in the audience, just to see that happen. And I couldn't believe it. And unfortunately, I made the post and I talked to some other people this weekend, and they weren't the only person to see that. And so it wasn't only just one person winning. It was multiple people winning in a class of 2, turning pro, competing as a pro. And it was just mind-blowing to me.
That's interesting. Was it across like different classes you were mentioning there, like not just bodybuilding?
Yeah, I mean, so the way that the show was broken up, this one in particular, the men were in the morning, the women were in the afternoon. Yep. I did not watch the women. I was just interested in the bodybuilding class. But I did see the results. And across the board, there was a few classes that did win with 2 and or 3 competitors. Now, I can understand if it's a class, let's say like women's bodybuilding or women's physique, where there's always less competitors in, and maybe if they have rules in place for like, hey, if there's 3 or 4 in this class, then okay, maybe they could award a pro card, I should say. But for an open bodybuilding class, awarding it with 2. Now, I did check this organization's website. I guess I'm going to just quit beating around the bush. It was the INBA, PNBA. I did check their website, and it did say class of 2, they could award a pro card, and I was shocked to read that. And there's one reason, I've personally never competed with them. I don't think I ever will. I don't send my clients to them either, just because, do you really want to send them to an organization who just hands out pro cards like that? It's just really not special, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. What was some kind of initial feedback? I saw your post on Facebook and Instagram, so I was seeing, different comments from people. What was the majority? Because I assume most of your circle is probably like us within the natural bodybuilding community. So what was a lot of feedback you were getting?
A lot of it was that they agreed that pro cards should not be given out to a class of 2. And I put in my story, where people could vote, and it was 98% people agreed. And then the other people said they just misclicked or whatever. So almost of the people agreed. And what I put there was, I wish I didn't have to make this post, but it's happening.
Yeah.
And I think that people just don't realize it because they see their friend or they see someone that they follow directly or indirectly on social media say, hey, I won my pro card today. But what does that really mean?
Yeah.
Does that mean that they beat 10 guys? Does that mean that they beat 1? So as me as a pro, I think it really, waters it down. And I know Alberto has spoken on this before, and I'm sure he has. He'll kind of tell you what he thinks too, but I'm sure that we're all on a very similar page.
Yeah. So yeah, Alberto, what's your kind of quick takes on the whole subject as well?
Okay, so my first season was in 2007. Like most people, just totally messed that up. So much, in fact, that I couldn't leave that alone. I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna compete the next year. We got our stuff together the next year, and I remember the first show I did was I won the overall, and then I got my pro card. So I got made out of my class, won the overall, and I'm kind of like, well, that's cool. I got my pro card too, but it was very besides the point. I was kind of like, okay, well, there we go. Yeah. So and then my second show, exactly the thing. And which kind of sucks, man, because you're like, man, you should be more pumped than this. But the show I really wanted was the Muscle Mayhem at the time, which was known as the Capital City. And I was so pumped. I remember I remember calling the promoter, Tina Bell, and I'm like, how many light weights do you have? We have, I think it was 11. And I'm like, yes, there we go.
Yeah.
Now I'm biting my fingernail. And then I got that pro card, and then I was like, finally, this is what it should feel like. I made it out of my class. The winners of the other classes up there, and we're duking it out. And I picked that show because Mo Gialua had tried to get a pro card there, and he didn't get it before. Leroy Perry had tried to get his pro card there, and he didn't get it before. So Jeff Alberts tried to get it. So to me, I'm like, I want a show like that, so that if I get my pro card, it's with talent, and I earned it. So honestly, at that show, winning my class and not winning my pro card would have meant more than getting that pro card at the other shows. And I don't know, it kind of tainted my first victory in a way. Had they just given me the overall, I would have included it. But it's don't give me a pro card, not this. So I think even back then, this was 2008. It was a little bit harder. There was less opportunities. People would fly from across the country for specific shows. But even then, I would look at the NPC guys, and I remember a bodybuilder by the name of Bob at Picarillo. And he was a fan favorite. I remember he tried, I think he finally got it on his 11th or 12th year of like going to nationals.
Wow.
And like rightfully so, like the man broke on. I was like I did it. Like I am accomplished.
Yeah.
I now belong at that level. So like we just need more of that in this sport, I believe.
So you mentioned like wanting that challenge and wanting to, you know, when you heard there's a class of 11 guys, you're like, okay, I want in on that. Do you think that mentality is fading a little bit? Not even in just bodybuilding, but I think just society in general. You know, people are trying to find the easy way, the path of least resistance. Like, do you think that's something that we're seeing a trend in? You know, when it comes to turning pro, and someone's like, oh, if I only have to beat one other guy, well, there it is. There's my ticket almost, right?
Yeah, it's. I mean, when you think about it, it's in our blood. So one of my favorite Instagram pages, like to hype me up pre-training, is Nature's Medal. Because
that page is savage.
Like, this is like animals wake up and they're like, right, I'm gonna try not to get killed, and I'm gonna try to eat today.
Yeah.
And if you are a human being, you are part of the lineage of this primate that a long time ago said, you know what, I'm gonna get down on the floor and I'm gonna risk it all. And you know, it took a lot of that, a lot of, you know, genetic dead ends and a lot of competing to make us humans what we are today, like the powerhouse of basically planet Earth. So it's in our blood. It's good for us. It's good not just within the sport of natural bodybuilding, but that is how things should be sorted out. Obviously in an ethical way, but like let us compete, and you should want to compete, and you should want to know where you stand so that you could, you know, improve upon your 8th place, your 5th place. My first pro, I was 11th out of 11. And I was like, okay, well, now I know. It's you know? So, yeah, I'd much rather have that than the participation medal any day. I think it just does society good as a whole.
Yeah. Brandon, any other words on that subject?
Yeah, I think it's kind of funny that Alberto placed 11th in his first pro show, and that's really fitting. I had kind of a somewhat similar experience, but a little bit different. So I did an NGA pro show that was small. And I actually won that one, believe it or not. My pro debut, I won it. So I was riding high, but as we know, like the NGA doesn't necessarily have like the toughest competition. That was in 2015. So then I went to compete in what was PA, now the IPE, and I got 7th out of 9. And I was just, I couldn't believe it. But then I looked at the pictures and I was like, damn, man, these guys rolled me, you know? And I remember driving back from Minnesota at the time, and it was like an 8-hour drive. And I was driving back with my now wife, and I just felt terrible. And I was like, you know, I never want to feel this way again, because I just got rolled by these men. So then I used that and applied it to what I was doing in the gym, and took, you know, years off. And then decided, hey, you know, I literally need to take 3+ years to come back. And that's what I did. I feel like a lot of these guys think that, well, they either do one or two things. They either earn their pro card and they never compete, or they earn their pro card and they try to jump into a show and they get rolled, and then they were like, oh, shit, I guess I'm not pro ready. And then they just never compete again. Yeah. And then it's really hard to see, you know, you don't really find guys like myself, Alberto, Jeff, guys that come back, you know, every so many years and keep on improving. It's almost a rarity. And I think that's why so many of us pros know each other, because we keep showing up, you know, and there's less guys that keep showing up over the years. And it's unfortunate that that's how you actually have to make a name for yourself, is you have to place at the top of the pros, because there are so many other pros out there. You tell someone you're a pro bodybuilder, they just kind of like laugh at you. Like this past weekend, my brother-in-law had an engagement party, so we were like meeting the other side of the family, right? And people were asking me what I do, and like I would like hesitate.
Yeah.
Like, oh man, here we go. Like I gotta get it again to a new setup and, you know, new family. And like I left the part out that I was even a pro. I was like, you know, I'm a bodybuilding coach. This is what I do. This is my passion. Like I didn't even want to bring up that I was a pro, because they would just look at me in street clothes and be like, this guy doesn't look like a pro bodybuilder. Like, what is he talking about? And I was almost embarrassed, and it kind of wrapped in what happened earlier in the day. on Saturday. And I just couldn't believe that they're just handing out these pro cards. And I'm like, I'm not even going to mention that I'm a pro bodybuilder. And not that they watch the show. They have no idea. But I was just like, man, I'm just not feeling great today being a pro.
Yeah, that's weird. Like a weird feeling to think about when someone thinks that they're a professional at something and you're like, man, it kind of feels like not as cool as 18-year-old Brandon might have thought it would have been. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? And that's where, for myself, like, a couple steps behind you guys, and this is why I think chats for me are so valuable when I can talk to guys like you. It's like I'm on the outside hoping to enter the ranks one day, but it's like, okay, how do I make this still mean, for 18-year-old Leroy to make it seem just as special, right? So, that's where, 2 years off, like you mentioned, really trying to figure out, okay, what do I want, and what's the best route to get it to make it mean the most, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let's get into some questions then, and we'll kind of dive a little bit deeper. So one of the ones that came in, and I could be totally wrong, but this might have been from one of the fellows you would have saw compete there, Brandon. I could be totally wrong, and if he's watching, if this isn't you, then it might not be. But anyways, he asked about if there should be a voting system from the judges on whether or not they feel like if there is, two competitors per se, the judges sit down and say, okay, what do we think? Yes or no? Is he pro-worthy? Is he not? What do you guys think about that?
Go ahead and take it, Alberto.
I think that adds another layer of the issue with the sport is it's subjective. So I think rather than giving the judges yet like another decision to make, there should just be a system that we abide by that just makes sense and in itself filters out only the best athletes.
Right. And I think it might have been Joe who asked that question. Could have been Joe LeClaire, I think his name is. I might be butchering his last name. But he's already a physique pro, classic physique pro. And he just won his bodybuilding pro card in the INBA, PNBA this past weekend. So he's already a pro athlete in a different category. He earned it in bodybuilding. So I told him, like, hey man, I didn't realize it. Like, I wasn't calling you out. Like, it was in another show that he did. And he said if he didn't know me personally, he would have been offended, but knew where I was coming from. So I'm glad, like, I didn't piss him off. He's a good guy. But what I told him was the same thing that Alberto said. It's a slippery slope, Does it have to be unanimous? Does it have to be a majority? If you're going to have rules in place, like, just make it be a class of whatever, or better yet, and I'm sure we're going to talk about this in a little bit, is only have specific shows that are pro qualifying. And like Alberto said, it's going to kind of weed the shows out. And I hate to say this, but it's also going to have to weed the organizations out. Like, some of these organizations in probably our lifetime are probably going to have to wither away if others are going to succeed, because eventually people are going to start to realize, like, hey, this one's a joke, this one doesn't drug test, and like there's certain things about these organizations, and it's across the board that they do these things. And you don't want to put organizations on blast, but then it's like people need to know what they're getting into.
Yep. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. There is, especially natural bodybuilding, a lot of, quote unquote smaller organizations that are handing out pro cards and all these things that, maybe don't mean as much as some others. And you're right, they probably will kind of fall to the wayside over the next few years as people are like, well, I'm a pro here, but there's a bunch of pros over here that look a lot better than me, right? So maybe it's not as important.
Yeah, actually, I won't name the Fed, but probably the worst example, and I've seen this happen before, but actually, okay, you can do your research if you want, but you guys know Jose Francisco, right?
Yeah.
Crazy God. The first pro card, the way he won that, he'll tell you that, first of all, he doesn't compete there anyways, but it was just weird. So him and some other guy named Corey Samuelson were up there for the overall lightweight heavyweight. both great physiques. Corey ended up winning. And when the judges decided, you know what, Francisco was a pro card too. Oh, wow. So it's like basically, MC, who happened to be the president, who came up and he's like, yo, like, these athletes were so good. And if you know, because the MC was a president, so if you know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. Yeah. And I'm like, damn, like, after that, like, the only thing that's left is, like, they just need to call out, like, tell the audience, like, basically, look beneath your chair, because you might have a that's the only thing that can make that worse.
Right.
You know,
and that's the thing, like, in that specific instance, I'm sure Jose did not feel like he deserved it, but he did earn pro status, and I don't know the method that he earned, like his WNBF pro card or whatever, but you could see that Jose went and proved himself the last time he competed, and he won, WNBF Universe, so he's, a good pro now, and I think that's what a lot of us, at least how I feel, have to do when you kind of earn your pro card in a roundabout way, and then you almost feel like, hey, I need to go to this pro show and win it, or at least place in the top 3 to really cement my status as a pro, and otherwise, it's just like you're just some other Joe Blow.
Yeah, and like with him, it was few people take that approach. Like a lot of people have won that pro card and they've been like, that's it, I've reached the pinnacle. Right. To me, that just takes away from his special day, because when he got his pro card, like that could have been, that should have been it. Like, it almost taints it for you to hear that, and you're like, we'll see about this one. But yeah, no, there used to be jokes even back like 10 years ago about like how I opened up a Cracker Jack box, and guess what I found in there? Right, and that was kind of the case then, because we didn't have a system where you would go to the national level, and like now it's like even gotten worse. And how I mentioned it, like I'd be willing, like I would have been offended a few years back, but I'd be willing to give up my pro status for the betterment of the sport, and like let's just have an expansion draft and start all over, because it's needed, in my opinion.
Right, and I was thinking about that today, and I do remember you saying that in the past. And I know that, that's not going to happen, right? Like, that's just a pipe dream. But what I was thinking was, you need to draw a line in the sand, right? It says, okay, this stops here, right? So, like, from here on out, you have to rework the entire system. And I don't know, Leroy, that might be one of the questions that we're going to get into about, like, our suggestions to rework it. But obviously, something needs to change, because the more that you just keep muddying the waters and handing out all these pro cards, eventually it's just going to ruin the sport to a point where it literally means nothing. And then you have all these pros, and this is what I was kind of getting at in the post, too, was a lot of it comes down to money, right? And I mentioned that, hey, a pro membership is literally double that of an amateur. These organizations are just raking in all this money. And, like, I paid my pro memberships this year, and I'm not competing, but yet you have to keep paying in order to stay relevant. Otherwise, you lose your pro status. And they're not cheap. One was $175. And I'm like, gee, that's great. They're going to have maybe one pro show this year, but hey, I'm relevant. What's going on with that?
Yeah, that's frustrating. Do you think, like I know with the IFBB, once you get your pro card, you're pro forever. Now, what are your guys' takes on the whole, like, you need to compete every X number of years and stuff like that? Do you think that is a pro or a con?
It's a pro for the athlete, and take that one. It's a con for the federation. I can see how, like when you imagine starting an NFL season and like whatever one of the teams is like, yeah, we're not ready this year. We'll be back next year. For the fan, it just kind of makes it less predictable, and that's why we're kind of negotiating this thing about like, hey, maybe next year, because you almost have to do that. Like you have to go after around and get a general idea of like who's going to be active and what part of the year they're going to be active, and try to make those things line up. So I can see why federations have those rules.
Mm-hmm. And I think, with our sport being so unique, the way that it does take a toll on us, right? Physically, mentally, emotionally, it's rough to compete every single year. So like It's not in football, it's not like badminton or whatever, where you could just go and play every day. Like, yeah, we're in the gym, but we can't physically, at least most of us, I should say, some people do, but we can't go out and compete at a high level every single year, because eventually you're going to start to look worse and worse and worse.
Yep.
So I can see why organizations, yes, they do want their money coming in, because from a business standpoint, obviously you want a steady income. All of us can say that. That's why we have jobs. We need the steady income to support ourselves. But from the athlete standpoint, and especially like this year with COVID going on and everything, you would think they would make some kind of an exception where it would roll over to next year, and I just don't think that's going to happen. But as far as is it a benefit, I think there's always pros and cons. But I think, a lot of it is a negative where they would force you to compete. That's just my opinion. But, I think that's why a lot of what goes on within natural bodybuilding goes on behind the scenes, because I've been talking to Alberto, I've been talking to Lane Norton to try to get him to compete. Like, I'm like, hey, Lane. And I was even like, I name dropped Alberto, I name dropped Jeff, I name dropped Whitaker. I was like, Lane, like, all these guys are probably going to compete next year. Like, I'm going to compete. Why don't you, like, step on stage? Because he kind of teased it. And I'm like, dude, just pull the trigger. Like, all of us are going to 2021.
That's sick. I'm stoked. Okay, let's get into another question. And you guys talked about it earlier about pro qualifying shows and having specific shows for that. So why don't we dive into that a little bit? Do you think there's one in the spring, one in the fall? What are your thoughts on how that would potentially be structured versus some federations having almost every other show feeling like, oh, pro card, right?
I think, first of all, just for the sake of, because I know most likely some big leagues will be listening to this. I think what we're doing here is just having a discussion without necessarily thinking over the logistics, because I get ideas thrown in regards to like what I should be doing with my company, and it's like it's more complicated than that. It's a great idea, and yeah, there might be something there, but so again, hopefully, like this along with other discussions just kind of helps shape and mold. Yeah, I think something more similar to NPC Nationals, where just to be fair to the athlete, like, hey, let's have maybe spring, like national shows in spring, some in fall, and yeah, if you qualify, you have, I don't know, like 2 years till you're nationally qualified for 2 years, something like that. I think would be great. But yeah, I don't think all shows based off like the random amount of athletes they get on that day should be pro qualifiers. There used to be a time actually when we would look through shows and we're like, nope, not a qualifier, not a qualifier, not a qualifier, and it was clear as day. So we moved from that obviously now, but yeah, I think just having tiers, national level shows, I think that would be amazing, and it would do the sport a whole lot of good.
Right, yeah, I agree. I was thinking today as well that it would make sense to have a few pro qualifiers throughout the year, just geographically speaking. So, like, let's just say you divide the United States up, like east, west, Midwest, and South. And you would literally have, let's say, and you could have spring and fall. You could literally give out 8 pro cards a year. That's still a lot, but it would bring in a lot more people. And then you could do that in different organizations too, because we know these organizations, aren't necessarily going to go away. But you could literally just break up the United States the way it's geographically broken up always, and then you could award 8 pro cards, and that would be still a lot, just 2, right? Because if you just have, okay, this is the show, and I feel like a lot of us, we know what the big shows are in the particular organizations, right? So Alberto and the Muscle Mayhem, right? So that would only make sense to like keep that one. Maybe the Hercules, for the WNBF as well, like on the East Coast. And then you could like split it up, and that would also encourage organizations to branch out. Because as we all know, like the WNBF, for example, and I'm just talking about it because I feel like you guys are more familiar with the WNBF in general. I don't have any experience with them. I've never competed with them. But from what I've seen, they hold a lot on the Coast and West Coast. Right? There's not a lot in the Midwest where I am. So if they broke it up geographically, it would be awesome to have a big show here in the Midwest that could be a pro qualifier, or a big show in the South that could be a pro qualifier. So that could happen where, you know, you would have, Alberto kind of put this in his post, where you have like local shows or so that would be like the qualifier, right? So you could have a show in every state if you really felt like it. But that would be probably a lot of overkill. But those would not be pro qualifiers, obviously. You'd have to place, you know, top 5, whatever in your class, and then you can go do the big regional show, and then that's where they would hand out the pro card. You know, like I said, there would still be potentially 8 given out every year, but 8 is better than 8 at one show.
Yeah, and I mentioned in the comments when we were talking about this that that's how it used to be here in Canada. Within, like, so right now in Canada we have the CPA, the Canadian Physique Alliance, which is under the IFBB. We don't have, like, the WNBF. Their presence in Canada is only out in like BC and stuff like that, which I'm trying to change. But anyways, we used to have just before the CPA like merged everything, it was the OPA, so the Ontario Physique Alliance, and there were smaller provincial organizations that would all come together. So we had like regional events, then you would have for your province. So we'd have, you know, local stuff, and then I would compete for all of Ontario, and then it would be all of Canada, and then that's when you could potentially earn your pro card. That's where Quinton Rhea actually won his pro card, and then so on and so on. So that's how it used to be, and then they whatever merged or did the change ups. Now we have the CPA for the Canadian Physique Alliance, and you just have basically qualifiers for the national event. So it's still kind of there, but they took out a tier, so you're still getting, you know, a very broad spectrum of people who like to call themselves nationally qualified, when really, like, you probably wouldn't have got through that middle provincial step, you know, 4 or 5 years ago, right?
Right.
So, yeah, I think, yeah, having 1 or 2 more steps to really, you know, earn it, right? Just like we talked about at the beginning of the podcast, or, you know, earn that, you know, call yourself a national level athlete. Like, okay, you're saying you're one of the best in the country. Like, you're not a pro yet, but you're still that upper echelon. Like, that means something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But
that actually means something, you know? Like, not so much, I think, not as much anymore. But I remember back in the day, you know, people say, like, oh, that dude's not qualified. But, like, you knew he had some game, you know? Right? And so it's not a pro card, but it's still something to be proud of, and something, like I said, like Bob Shake was nationally qualified for like 11 years, you know, and like everyone knew he was good, you know. So, you know, that's one of the reasons that like the bodybuilders from the UK, they're so freaking sick with it, man, because like when I got familiar with this, I'm like, damn, like that's a lot of hoops to jump just to get your pro card. And then with all those countries in general, like that's why it's always super impressive what they sent over to WNBF Worlds, because they really do a good job in making sure like the best like make it. So yeah, man, it would be. I swear, I'd give up my pro card, man. I'd be like, take it. You know, like the sport's bigger than I am. Take it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I was thinking about that too, and I think I even commented on the post how the people from the UK just come in here and roll us. You know, they're so impressive. They just come in and they just walk the floor with us. And we're like, first of all, who are you and where'd you come from? Because as U.S. guys, like, we don't pay attention to them until they're in front of us, until they beat us. And we're like, dude, what are you, like, what kind of water do they have over there? But it's because they're literally the best person in their country. Like, think about it. If you took, and I understand that United States is way bigger than the UK, but literally, if you took even the best person from your state, like Alberto, could you say that you're the best bodybuilder in Colorado? Maybe. You know, maybe. I know I'm not the best natural pro in Indiana. I've been beaten by a natural pro in Indiana a few times. So I'm like, damn, like I can't even say I'm the best one in Indiana, let alone the best one in the country.
Yeah, that's true. And man, those UK guys, we'll get a whole tangent on that, but they're monsters. The amount of guys that I talk to and have had on the podcast, like, and guys younger than me. I'm 26. I'm young, and they're like 21, 22. And I'm like, how do you look like that?
Mm-hmm.
That's so cool. Okay, this was a cool one. Should there be basically a show of shows? The WrestleMania of natural bodybuilding, the Super Bowl, where, you could bring in all pros are invited. You got a natural pro card, whatever organization, IP, PNBA, WNBF, whatever. You've got it. Do you think there would be any place for that ever?
Yeah, so there is. It's going on this year, but the way that it's structured, it's not at the complete end of the season. So Mr. America was bought by a gentleman. He's actually the IMB, PNBA, he's a promoter, but it's unsanctioned, right? So it's not under their organization title, which is a good thing. And this is what he did. He said, hey, if you hold a pro card in any organization, you just have to prove it, and then you're allowed to come within the structure under a WADA. So you have to be WADA drug test, you have to follow WADA, and then you could come do Mr. America. So I'm very interested to see how that goes this year. I know a handful of guys doing it. I'm just wondering how the turnout's going to be. Next year, if the turnout's good and the show looks good, that's one that I would like to do. And I'm going to encourage a lot of guys to do it because over the years, there's been a lot of back and forth of who's the best. Because let's be honest, like I stick with like IP and OCD. Those are the two organizations that I compete in. So I think that whoever wins those is the best. But the guys who win WNBF Worlds or, PNBA, Mr. Olympia, they're the best. So if you get all those guys, you literally put them in one show that's open, unsanctioned, then you could kind of see how everyone stacks up. I'm kind of pumped about it this year. With COVID going on, I don't expect it to be phenomenal, but at least you could tell the show quality and see, next year it would be, double that to see if we could get a lot of people to go there. And it could be like a showdown, even though it would be before a lot of the world contest.
I did not know that was a thing. That's exciting then.
Mm-hmm. Do you guys remember the Cronus? That was a few years back.
No.
Yeah, that was supposed to be, it was the end-all natural bodybuilding competition. Long story short, I think no one got the money. I don't know if the court settled like all that mess that it went to be. But at first, it was pretty promising. It's like the promo videos were hype, man, for back in the day, and they were talking about like there was literally a draft day where like the names were going to be mentioned as to like who they picked. But then the names finally did come out. It was one of those where it's like you don't follow natural bodybuilding really closely because they didn't do a very good. They were solid guys there, for sure, but they didn't. Some big names missing. They were active that year. So at some point, this is just like when I have the space to do it. That is something that I personally want to do. Is just have like an unsanctioned. I pick the pros, what a deal, and just have it be like I'm proud of my sport, man. Like people. Like sometimes they have this misconception where they're like, "Oh, you stay there because you wanted to be a bigger fish in a small pond." And I'm like, "Bro, you can see some of the elite guys on the side. Like the rest has made that jump, and they've had more success in IFBB than they've had in natural bodybuilding." Right? So I'm mega pumped, and I know the sport. And like literally, end of the year before, I'll be emailing everyone. It's like, "Are you going to? Are you not?" And I want to have something again, like it's frustrating because man, he should be allowed to compete with these guys, but he can't, and we just want to know his plan, and it's we do it right. It's one of those shows I think where like meatheads like us, we will fly over there. Like,
yeah, absolutely.
Done right. So, yeah, at some point I'd love to do something like that where it's like, we get the banner out the way, no politics. I want to run the show maybe in a way where, kind of like we're just pitching ideas here where it's like, hey, you federations that actually do this, feel free to borrow that idea and maybe throw that in there. So, yeah, it's a pipe dream, man. It's a pipe dream. I obviously wouldn't compete, but I'd be so proud to see all those guys out there and just, it's a freaking game of inches at that level. It's amazing.
Oh, yeah. Get me on that list.
Oh. My man, yeah. You know what? Me and Brian were talking about you the other day, man. And I think most people would take it as an insult, but it isn't. And it's like, he's kind of like a poor man Doug Miller, which is insane. Because,
yeah, that's a true statement. It kind of can be insulting, but flattering.
yeah. You're still on your incline, man. But like legit.
Yeah, I'm 28, at least for one more day. I'll be 29 tomorrow.
Scary. But yeah, there's just so many good examples out there in regards to like what our sport is in terms of talent, and people just don't know, man.
Yeah, there's so many, and across all organizations, there's so many extremely impressive athletes that not a lot of people know about, which is unfortunate. And it'd be nice to see all those names on one grand stage where you could be like, okay, if you don't know what natural bodybuilding is, here's the elite of the elite, and everybody will look at it and go, man, they're actually onto something, right?
And then I think with people that be like, I don't believe it, but you know what? Fuck those guys.
Right.
To the point where, like, if you let go of your quads, like, you might lose the show,
Right? Oh, yeah. I think one of the biggest hurdles that just natural bodybuilding as a whole encounters is just people just don't want to travel, right? They don't want to fly across the country to compete at a show, but yet everybody and their brother flies down to Miami for NPC Nationals. They look forward to it. They make it a vacation. They're like, oh man, I'm headed to Miami. But then you can't literally get some people in natural bodybuilding to cross the state line just to compete at a show. So it's very frustrating to see that, where you get people in the NPC and the IFBB, it's like a cult mentality. They're just like all about it all the time. And then for natural bodybuilding, of course, you get guys like us that are all about it, but they're few and far between. Like I talked about earlier, all the pros, all the guys who are really into it all know each other because there's only so few of us.
Do you think, why do you think that is? Like, do you think, I don't know, why do you think natural bodybuilding has such a broad spectrum of maybe who takes it seriously and who doesn't? Whereas you're right, it does seem like if you're on the enhanced side of things, like you're all in, laser focus. Like, why do you think there's that disconnect?
I'll let you start this up.
Oh, you want me to go with it?
Yeah.
Okay, so I think a lot of it just has to do with what you mentioned about being enhanced. Like, that's not something that you take lightly, right? Not that any of us are going to take drugs in our lifetime, but that's a decision that you have to be all in. Like, for a lot of people, natural bodybuilding is just a hobby. It's not people's professions like us. Naturally, because it's our profession and because we coach it, we're going to be all in. But for your average person, the people that we coach, their main job is not natural bodybuilding. They have day jobs that have nothing to do with fitness in general. They just do it as a hobby. But it's like the people that are enhanced, and I'm not saying everybody in the NPC IFBB is enhanced, but a lot of those guys are. You look at NPC Nationals, and you could just about guarantee all those guys are running a lot of gear that's very expensive, and you just don't do that recreationally, right? You have to be all in. You're naturally going to be very, very passionate about that because you just don't inject yourself lackadaisically.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, I definitely say, well, that's a big entry barrier, right? That was, honestly, when I first decided I wanted to bodybuild, I thought that's just something you kind of had to do. So I'm like, I don't know about this. So if you're beyond that, it's like, yeah, going to Miami for my show, absolutely. But then I think the other thing, it's just that tier system is just built into the culture. You know, like you start up and you're like, man, I want to place in the top whatever. I want to be nationally qualified, and it's kind of laid out there early on, and it's like, this is how we do it. So I think if we're less ambiguous when it comes to our paths, people would just be more okay with it, because you know it is. If that's just how things have been done, people going to do it that way.
Mm-hmm.
All right, one more before we shut it down, and this was kind of a friend of mine likes to argue, so he played devil's advocate on the other side of things, but he basically said, like, okay, if you're a good pro, you know, and there's got to be bad pros, people that are getting it that maybe might not necessarily be at that level or whatever, like, why do you care? He's like, what's it matter? If you're a good pro, you'll win your good pro show. The bad pros will place where they'll place. What's the big deal? So I said, I'll bring it up and we'll get some answers. And you know, that was his big one, was like, why would that bother you then? Because you'll place where you'll place, they'll place where they'll place, and life goes on. So what's kind of the biggest hiccup with all that? Brandon?
Okay, so from a pride standpoint, if I were to win a pro show, I would want to face the absolute best of the best. I wouldn't want to win a pro show versus a bunch of shitty guys and be like, oh, well, I won. And then someone looks at the lineup and says, well, no kidding, you won. These guys are all sloughs. You know, for me, I would know that I didn't necessarily earn that, or I didn't beat the best of the best. But, for example, when I competed in 2018, and I placed like 4th at the Yorton in my class, and I placed 5th at IPE Worlds, I looked at those guys and I said, you know what? They were better than me, but I was very proud to place where I did. And I beat some good guys, but I was also, you know, not quite good enough. Mm-hmm. So I think that was enough for me to say, hey, you know what? At least I lost to some good guys and I beat some good guys. But if I were to win a pro show that didn't have good competition, it would hurt my pride to say, hey, you know, here's a pro victory. But like, then you don't see any pictures from it because, you know, there either wasn't enough guys, which happens a lot.
Yeah.
Honestly, like these pro shows where there's 3 competitors and you say, hey, I placed 3rd at my pro show. We're like, well, there's 3 competitors, you know, what the hell? But so you don't see any pictures from it. So it's like, you want to have the best of the best on stage within reason. You know, you want everyone to look good and you want it to be a battle. Like Alberto was saying earlier, if you let go your legs for too many poses, like that could cost you a show. And I would want like that kind of pressure on me and that kind of competition personally, just because I'm ultra competitive and what I want to do. That's because, you know, I'm trying to twist Alberto's arm to compete against me and Lane and, you know, Jeff and all these guys, because next year I want it to be the hands down best year of natural bodybuilding that there has been in recent memory. Right now, Alberto, you're kind of the OG of natural bodybuilding. You've probably been there already, right? You've been to some great shows, some great showdowns, but we want to have that come back where it's like, damn, these 10 pros in this class are lights out. Yeah. And you want to be on stage for 40 minutes because the judges can't just make up their minds.
Yeah.
You know what? There's like this, as much as like we want to beat each other's head in, like there is huge respect like between us. And shoot, I think it was the KC show. It was my first show in my last season. You know, to hear from like Robert Johnson, it's like, bro, you're on the right track. Like that means a lot. So when like it's a tight group, man, and you have to earn that jacket, you know. So like we want more of that, you know. We don't want that. We don't want to be in our little crew, and then there's that dude with his back against the wall over there. You know, it's like it takes away from it, you know, because we're all really proud of what we want to get there, and you know, outside of just the bodybuilding aspect, like when you do this, I think one of the things that motivate you is like the constant self-improvement, you know, the figuring out ways to just get better, and then that just kind of becomes a way of life. When you have competitors out there that make you do dumb shit like 2-3 weeks out because you know what they're doing, that's what it's about. And like that's what I find the most thrilling. And I want it to be that way. And I think again, like we can do better. And I don't want to win a film with like me and a bunch of plumbers. You know, no offense. Like that's
No offense
that's
to
just
plumbers.
yeah. So yeah. Again, like there's the coaching side of me, and then there's the athlete side of me. And like this podcast here, it's the athlete side of me. It's like, you know, I want to, you know, when I'm doing arms, I want to think of my man over here. You know, like when I'm hungry and dieting, I want to think like, damn, Brian Whitaker's going to be doing this show. Like, yeah, you suffer through your moment. So we just want more of that. I think it's going to do the sport a whole lot of good, and it's going to inspire, I think, a lot of that next generation to who is supremely talented to like, yo, you know, I can be challenged just as much on this side, not just that NPC side. Let me go give myself some of that. So it just sets up the sport for something better in the long term. So yeah, we want the brotherhood to just remain intact and continue to be strong, and if not get stronger.
Make natural bodybuilding great again, right? Awesome. All right, I think that's a good way to end it. Any closing thoughts, guys, before we shut her down?
I mean, I'll just say one last thing, just kind of reiterate what Alberto was saying earlier, you know, in the podcast, was that all of this, you know, it does come from a point of love, right? Because we're all very passionate about natural bodybuilding. We want to see it improve. This wasn't necessarily to knock what's going on. It's just to start a conversation, or at least get a conversation potentially started where maybe something can change. And I know that it would take, you know, to move mountains in order to get some of this done, but that it all starts with one thing. And maybe this will be it, maybe not, maybe it'll get other people talking. But the best thing that we could do is just try to have these conversations with, you know, important people. And maybe it'll get to a point where enough people will start to talk about it, and then change will happen. So I just wanted to conclude with that personally, just because I tend to be outspoken on certain things, because I like have my own point of views, and I think I could come across as maybe putting down other people sometimes, because, hey, you know, this is the way Brandon thinks. Well, because I'm just so passionate, that's how I come across. I get these ideas, and like I stay awake at night thinking of these things, and I just like really want to try to make the sport great. And it comes from a position of passion, not from putting down.
Yep. Awesome. And Berto, anything you want to throw on to finish her off?
So I kind of live between both worlds in that I'm a huge fan of drug-tested powerlifting. And it's crazy because drug-tested powerlifting is bigger than what's going on the non-tested side. And it wasn't always that way. There was a point where powerlifting was way more scattered than like natural bodybuilding's ever been, which is kind of crazy to think of because we're pretty scattered. And now they're killing it. And I think what really, really sets them apart is obviously the drug-free thing. You know, I think that just brings in more people like right away. But then the other part is just their systems are so solid. Like the rule book is the rule book. This is how we do things, and because it's so standardized, like it's allowed it to grow and be consistent and be fair. And I think especially when you're dealing with a subjective sport, you can't make up shit as you go along. So again, it's a terrific sport. I think it can. At some point, I mean, look what happened with powerlifting. I think we can do something similar, but it's going to take a lot of getting rid of old habits and just embracing new things. Like like you always like more than ever. I listen to young people because I'm 37 now, man, and like a lot of the best ideas in regards to like how we should do things, like that's where they come from. That's what's going to change the game. So we just need to stop being old heads sometimes and get with the program, because this thing can be something else.
Awesome. All right, people. Hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Hopefully this was insightful, gave you guys some ideas, and maybe maybe it's a kickstart for a change in the future. So thank you guys for coming on. I really appreciate it. Thanks everybody for watching, and we'll see you guys in the next one.